You've been staring at the horizon for days, the rhythm of the waves becoming a hypnotic, numbing pulse in your mind. But then, the pattern breaks. A shape emerges from the mist, darker than the water, standing rigid and unnatural against the organic chaos of the swells. As your vessel draws closer, the silhouette sharpens into a ship. Her sails are luffing pointlessly in the wind, as if they have forgotten their purpose, while the wheel drifts aimlessly to port with the slow indecision of something left unattended. Shouting until your throat is raw brings no answer. The only reply is the slap of water against the rotting hull and the groan of timber under strain. You climb the ladder, the damp wood slick under your hands, and step onto the deck. The air here feels different, still, heavy, and pressing against your chest. Below deck, a half-eaten meal sits on the table, not yet surrendered to rot, and a pipe rests in an ashtray. The beds are unmade, holding the faint impression of bodies that are simply gone. There is no violence, no blood, no signs of struggle. You are standing in a graveyard that refuses to bury its dead. The realization arrives with a nauseating certainty. The ocean does not only take life. Sometimes it steals existence itself, removing the people and leaving the shell behind to drift, as if the sea is capable of erasing the middle of a story while keeping the cover intact. This is not just a maritime superstition. It is a recurring historical trauma. While the sea has claimed millions of lives through storms and warfare, there is a distinct category of disappearance that defies the logic of disaster. These are the derelicts found drifting with their cargo holds full and their lifeboats missing, ships that have become floating locked rooms with no key. The most enduring of these nightmares began on a cold December afternoon in 1872, when the brigantine Mary Celeste was spotted behaving strangely in the Atlantic by the crew of the Dei Gratia. The captain of the Dei Gratia knew Captain Benjamin Briggs by reputation as a capable and prudent man, the kind who would not abandon his ship unless forced by something truly dire. That is why the boarding party felt unease before their boots ever touched the deck, because the vessel they approached did not look wrecked. It looked merely wrong. Contrary to the myths that later grew around the case, the reality recorded in the Admiralty proceedings was not a theatrical tableau of steaming food and domestic calm, but something harsher and more disturbing. The ship was wet and had taken on some water, yet she remained seaworthy. Her pumps were functional. There were ample provisions aboard, and the cargo of industrial alcohol was largely intact. But the crew was gone. Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter, and 7 sailors, all vanished into the open ocean hundreds of miles from land. The ship's lifeboat was missing, and the details suggested haste. A tow line had likely been rigged and later found trailing broken, as if the crew had tried to remain connected to the ship, but lost it. The compass was damaged, its glass shattered, and the binnacle cover displaced, all of it hinting at panic rather than murder. Theories flooded in because humans cannot tolerate a blank space for long. Mutiny was an early suspicion, but there were no signs of violence in the cabins, and the crew had reportedly been vetted as reliable men. Besides, the cargo was raw industrial spirit, not the kind of alcohol one drinks for pleasure. Most of the barrels remained sealed, though a small number were found empty, likely having leaked. That leak becomes, in some versions of the case, the hinge on which everything turns, leading to a possibility that is both rational and terrifying. Imagine fumes accumulating in the hold during a period of calm, invisible and choking. Then, the moment the hatch is opened or the temperature shifts, the pressure changes abruptly and a violent report erupts. A cold explosion, powerful enough to blow hatch covers without scorching wood. In that instant, on a deck that smells of spirit and salt, Captain Briggs could have believed, with absolute sincerity, that his ship was about to detonate. If you think you're standing on a bomb, you don't debate, you act. You order everyone into the yawl, and you don't necessarily abandon the ship so much as retreat from it, keeping a line attached so you can return the moment the danger passes. But the sea does not care about your plan. The wind can rise, the sails can fill, and a heavy brigantine can gather speed with an unstoppable force. A tow line can snap, and suddenly 10 people can watch their sanctuary pull away, perfectly upright, sailing on without them, while they remain in an overloaded boat in cold water with nothing to hold on to. In that vision, there is no monster with teeth, no supernatural hand, only physics and fear, cooperating to produce the same result as any curse: a ship returned empty, and a family erased from the world. If the Mary Celeste embodies 19th century dread, the modern era did not dissolve these mysteries so much as it gave them new machinery and new reasons to feel impossible. Steel hulls and radios were meant to end the old ghosts, and yet the ocean did not become kinder. It simply became more indifferent against the backdrop of protocols and technology that were supposed to protect us. In 1955, the merchant vessel MV Joyita was expected to make a routine 2-day run between Samoa and the Tokelau Islands. She carried 25 people and a cargo of timber and medical supplies. She should have arrived with no story worth telling. When the ship failed to appear, a search covered a vast sweep of the South Pacific, but they found nothing. Then 5 weeks later, they found the Joyita, drifting more than 600 miles off course, listing heavily to port, decks awash, partially submerged, and yet stubbornly afloat. This is where the Joyita becomes its own particular nightmare, because she was not merely hard to sink, she was by design extremely buoyant. Her hull had been modified with cork for refrigeration, and that unintended choice made her resistant to going down. Even if filled with water, she would float. Captain Miller knew this fact intimately. Yet, when the boarding crews approached, they found the impossible. The ship was deserted. All 25 souls had abandoned a vessel that could not sink, trading the safety of the cork-lined hull for the deadly open ocean in small rafts that were missing. The condition of the ship suggested confusion and a slow descent into desperation. The radio was tuned to the international distress frequency, but a break in the cable meant that whatever calls had been made never truly left the bridge. It is the kind of detail that makes your stomach drop. They tried to be heard, yet the ocean kept them mute. An awning had been rigged over the deckhouse, implying that people had sheltered there for some time, waiting, rationing, and watching the horizon for rescue that could not hear them. And then investigators found details that felt like fingerprints of pain. A doctor's bag, a scalpel, and blood-stained bandages. The log and navigation tools were missing, suggesting a departure planned rather than accidental. The engine clutch had been partially disassembled, hinting at attempted repairs at sea that may have failed. Why would a competent crew abandon an unsinkable ship? The simplest answer is also the most frightening. A corroded pipe could flood an engine room, causing the ship to list while the engines die. A dead engine at sea is not merely inconvenience. It is a message that you are no longer choosing your direction. If, during that chaos, the captain was injured or incapacitated, the structure that keeps panic from becoming policy might have collapsed. People who don't fully understand buoyancy won't trust what they can't see, and a steepening tilt feels like imminent death. Fear can take the helm with brutal speed, and once it's in command, it makes the most fatal decision feel like the only decision. So, they climb down into rafts, believing they are escaping a sinking ship, and the ocean takes them quickly, through exposure, currents, and sheer distance, while the Joyita continues to drift, floating quietly like a cruel argument against the choice they made. History provides us with physical wrecks, rotting wood, and rusted iron that we can touch and analyze. But some ghost ships exist in a murky borderland between documented fact and maritime folklore, stories that persist because they touch upon our deepest fears of what might be out there, unseen and weaponized. In the years after the Second World War, the Malacca Strait, a crowded and treacherous passage point, became the backdrop for one of the most unsettling tales in maritime lore. The story of the SS Medan is often dismissed as a fabrication, yet the consistency of the reports and the sheer horror of the alleged details has kept it alive in the minds of many researchers. The story begins not with a sighting, but with a sound. Accounts differ on the precise year, but the details of the transmission are consistent enough to have burrowed into collective memory. Multiple ships navigating the strait, including the American vessel Silver Star, picked up a distress call that cut through the static with chilling clarity. The Morse code did not follow standard protocol. It was a frantic, disjointed transmission. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. A series of dots and dashes followed, incoherent gibberish tapped out by a hand losing control. Then, silence. Then, one final, lucid message arrived. 2 words that froze the blood of the radio operators listening miles away. I die. When the Silver Star located the Medan, the sea was calm and the ship appeared undamaged. There was no smoke or signs of collision. The American crew hailed the vessel, but the only response was the deep, rhythmic hum of the ocean. You can envision the boarding party climbing onto that deck, expecting to find a sick crew or a mechanical failure. Instead, they walked into a tableau of frozen horror. The decks were littered with the bodies of the Dutch crew. But they were not just dead, they were contorted. Reports from the boarding crew described the faces of the dead upturned toward the sun, eyes wide open and mouths gaping in a silent scream. Their arms were outstretched, as if fending off an invisible assailant. The ship's dog was found dead, frozen mid-snarl at something unseen. Even the captain on the bridge and the officers in the chart room were sprawled in the same defensive and terrified postures. There were no wounds, no blood, just a ship of corpses locked in a rigor mortis of pure fear. Before the Silver Star could tow the vessel to port for an investigation, smoke began to billow from the hold of the Medan. The boarding party barely had time to sever the tow line and retreat before a massive explosion ripped the ship apart. The vessel lifted from the water, broke its back, and sank rapidly, taking its dead and its secrets to the bottom of the strait. Skeptics dismissed the Medan as fabrication, noting gaps in registration and documentation. And they may be right, but the story persists because it offers a kind of explanation that is almost worse than the supernatural. The idea that human secrecy could create a haunted ship without ghosts. In the chaos after war, illegal cargo and hazardous chemicals moved through shadowed lanes were not only real but plentiful. If a ship carried volatile compounds and seawater breached a hold, toxic gas could spread quickly, and death could come without visible injury. A subsequent fire or explosion would not be a dramatic curse, but a crude erasure. A catastrophe that destroys the evidence and leaves only rumor. It is a theory that turns the ghost story into a crime scene, suggesting that the crew didn't die from the supernatural, but from the man-made horrors of a war that hadn't quite finished killing. We return then, from the humid folklore of the strait to the jagged reality of the American coast, where the ocean has no need for legend because it already has geography sharp enough to kill. The Diamond Shoals off Cape Hatteras are called the graveyard of the Atlantic for a reason, because shifting sands and violent currents have claimed more ships than anyone can count. But in early 1921, they claimed something else as well. The certainty that an investigation will always find its answer if you simply look hard enough. The Carol A. Deering, a massive 5-masted schooner, was spotted run aground on the shoals with her sails still set. A sight that felt less like a wreck and more like a ship caught in the act of trying to fight her way free. The seas were too rough for the Coast Guard to board immediately. So, for days they watched from a distance as the schooner battered itself against the bottom, helpless to intervene. And in that waiting, there's its own kind of dread, because time can erase the most valuable evidence while you stand and watch. When the surf finally calmed enough for rescuers to board, they found a vessel that had been stripped of its human center. The crew was gone, and so were personal effects. The navigational equipment and the ship's logs were missing. It felt less like an accident, and more of a deliberate departure, as if the people aboard had chosen to leave with what they believed they would need to survive. Yet, one detail made the scene feel terrifying. In the galley, food had been prepared for a meal that was never eaten. Not a melodramatic myth of steaming plates, but the plain evidence of routine interrupted, as if life had been cut mid-breath and the ship had continued without its occupants. The investigation into the Deering peeled back layers of human conflict that suggest a horror more intimate than sea monsters. The captain, W.B. Wormel, was a replacement, hired at the last minute for a crew he didn't know. He was an older man, disciplined and by the book. The first mate, Charles McClellan, was a man with a grudge, having been passed over for the captaincy. At a port stop before the final voyage, Captain Wormel had complained to another sailor that he was exhausted, that the engineer was drinking, and that he had to do all the navigation himself because he didn't trust his crew. "They will get me yet," he reportedly said. The theory here is dark and violent. Mutiny. Not the romantic mutiny of fiction, but the ugly kind, born from resentment, exhaustion, and opportunity. There were also suspicions of rum running during Prohibition that added another layer of motive and secrecy. If the captain was killed and the crew attempted to navigate without his skill, it's possible they stumbled into the shoals, and in the panic of grounding, they fled into lifeboats with whatever instruments and logs might protect them later. The sea, as always, would have been waiting to finish the story in its own way, swallowing the men and returning only the ship. The Deering was eventually dynamited to remove a navigational hazard, scattering the remains into surf and sand. There is something brutally symbolic in that act because it feels like the final destruction of an answer that was already slipping away. These vessels are only chapters we know, the ones that drifted back into view. For every ghost ship that is found, countless others sail into fog and simply cease, leaving no dramatic wreckage, no survivors, and no clean narrative that can be filed and closed. We build ships with steel and equip them with tools, so we convince ourselves that we have tamed the oceans, conquered the solitude, and turned disaster into a risk we can manage. But when a ship appears on the horizon, silent and empty, it shatters that illusion. It reminds us that the sea does not care about our technology, and it does not need to announce itself with violence to be lethal. Think about the last moments on those decks. The realization that the structure meant to keep you safe has become a cage. The decision to step off the wood and into the water. The silence that follows the splash. The ocean keeps its secrets. It swallows the evidence and returns an empty husk, a monument to the unknown. Somewhere in the unmonitored stretches of the Pacific or the freezing swells of the Southern Ocean, a ship might be drifting right now. The lights are out. The wheel is spinning freely. And if you were to step aboard, you would find only the wind, the rust, and the terrifying weight of a story that ended before it could be told. Would you stay to investigate? Or would you get back in your boat and sail away as fast as your engine could carry you, praying that whatever took them doesn't have eyes on you?